All right. Hey, what's going on, guys? Welcome back to another Five Nights at Freddy Fazbear Fall Fest Friday fun time. Say that 10 times fast. But welcome back. So this week is going to be very interesting. It's a new person, a new friend of the channel. Hopefully, we see them a lot more. But the reason why I'm going to this person, T Dreads, who I've never reacted to before. Actually, this is the first time I actually watched their channel, so this is going to be a very interesting first time for me, but very interesting of why I'm curious on this one is not only was this recommended by you guys, so that already gets me intrigued, but it also connects to the video we did last week talking about what the original story of Security Breach is because, brief recap, we know that Security Breach has been delayed several times. It's supposed to come out in 2020 and then eventually came out in late 2021. And it has also been widely reported that this was Steel Wool's first game being the heads of Five Nights at Freddy's, and Scott Cawthon, the original creator, was kind of given just little hints, little teases of what he wants certain characters and certain actions to be in Security Breach, but he wasn't given any explanation of what was going on. So it's like, what was the original story of Security Breach, where it's like, what did Steelwool want to do? And then what did Scott want to do? And that's where you had a mismatch, and that's where it became very cluttered and very confusing, like how this series has been prone to do. But this is going to be talking about Gregbot, which was a very controversial MatPat theory when the game first came out. So I'm very curious about where this video goes with it. But as always, if you are here to click on the Five Nights at Freddy stuff, I will leave chapters down in the video so you can skip. But per routine, we're going to do the banter section first. But again, obviously, like I said, if you want to skip that and you don't really care about the banter stuff, you can skip. But I think the banter section is pretty interesting because it's very relevant. It's talking about College Bowl 27, the controversy. And the reason why I want to talk about it is I just think it goes beyond, because simply you don't have to care about EA or college football or sports games. But the reason why I want to talk about it is just the state of gaming in general, of how, Sony has come out that they are going away from selling the actual like disc physical copies of games. Everything's now digital. And with the controversy stuff of EA College Ball, again, just the state of gaming as a whole. So I feel like that's why it's interesting, even if you're not a sports gamer, because again, I get Five Nights at Freddy's and sports doesn't really correlate much, perhaps. But if you are fully out the loop of what's going on, EA in College Football 27, in their single player offline Road to Glory and Dynasty modes, where you get to create a character and you get to have your own experience. It's your own fun sandbox adventure where you are meant to be the most overpowered character in your game. It's supposed to be for fun, for you, right? You're supposed to make it what you want. EA decided to take away some of that sandbox, take away some of that fun creativity, and instead not only take some of it away, but also repay the favor, and instead doing it with microtransactions. So not only did they take some of the freedom away from you as a player, they also added microtransactions, which is absolute BS. And I know like some people were being very ignorant. It's like, oh, well, what's the issue if, you're not a fan of, the microtransactions, you just don't have to buy it. It's like, that's not the point. It's not just a simple fact of microtransactions being in the game, because we obviously know, hey, it's the year 2026. We know microtransactions are in games. That's not the issue. The issue of why the state of gaming is bad, and the reason why I want to talk about, and the reason why I correlated to Sony going away from physical games anymore, is the scumminess of taking away what was previously free features to make the gaming experience fun for the player, taking it away and instead hiding it behind a paywall. So you're like, well, I get the allure of choice, but instead you're taking stuff away knowing that, hey, if we take away 80% of the game and we put it behind a paywall, then the people are going to buy it so they get their full experience, when that's not what gaming should be. You should be able to just simply buy the game and you get everything, you get full access to it because you bought it. So I just want to touch on that. But anyways, the state of gaming is very depressing. We don't own physical copies of games anymore, and companies are being very scummy, very greedy, where stuff that was previously free to us, available to us, are now being hidden behind a paywall, to a point where you own maybe 5% of a game and the other 95% is behind a paywall, which is absolutely terrible.
Of course not. Nothing in this franchise is ever an accident. Take a look at Gregory here. Notice anything familiar? Dark eyes, brown hair with a piece falling between his eyes, shorts, a shirt with 2 stripes across the middle. Ladies and gentlemen, Gregory is none other than the crying child. Don't believe me?
Wow, I can't believe Matt and Tom were so stupid. Ah, fuck. Scott! What are you trying to say? Why have you put this in your game? MatPat called this imagery out once and we all laughed at him for it, but now it's back. Again, a kid with dark hair and a dark shirt with stripes. He's sitting under a tree on a hill next to an animatronic. He's unmistakably supposed to evoke the image of these two, even to the point where they're both carrying their favorite plushies. But this isn't Gregory or the crying child, it's someone new, David Murray. I'll be honest, this doesn't feel like a coincidence anymore. I can accept this imagery once as simply paying homage to an old character, but now, again, with another kid, things are getting a little weird. So I started digging, because I wanted to see if our new friend David Murray actually connected to the crying child or Gregory in any meaningful way, and I hate what I found. By the end of this video, I'll tell you what the secret of the Mimic actually is, and why these characters might be more connected than MatPat and Tom ever could have realized. One of the main criticisms of—
Okay, wait, no, let me stop and think about that for a second, because hold on. We're already getting to the thick of things. Okay, hold on. I just need to process that for a second before we continue. David, the son of Edwin Murray, who is killed at a young age, is tied to the FNAF crying child, who is possessively, or possibly, not possessively, possibly the son of William Afton. And then you have Gregory, who is maybe the robot version of said child. Okay. I already get it off to a very interesting start, but you know what? I'm already intrigued. I love it.
MatPat's original theory, the idea that Gregory is somehow the crying child, is that it relied pretty heavily on visual similarities. Clothing, hair, and that sort of thing.
Not only that, but it was also gameplay details as well. Because there was, it was cut dialogue, but when Gregory first meets Freddy and you go in the stomach hatch and you go like underneath the pizza plets where you're in like, the machinery and you see all those like boxes and forklifts, and Freddy's talking about like how this is like the underground of the pizza plets, right? One of the cut messages he says in a dialogue before Freddy runs off into the med bay, he says that you're broken and you're bleeding. Now, the reason why that's very important is because at the end of FNAF 4, after the crying child was bitten, after he was shoved in the mouth of Fredbear on his birthday, and night sits, the FNAF 4 crying child is, in a black room with, the psychic friend Fredbear and the other plushies, and they say stuff like, "You're broken. We're still your friends. Do you still believe that?" So, in FNAF 4, "You're broken" is mentioned. And you have a cut line, cut dialogue. Sure, it's cut, but still, and at least insisted in the point in the game at one point in Security Breach saying, "Oh, you're broken." Then you have the design similarities of a child with brown hair and a striped shirt. You're broken. Similarities, like, come on. And plus, it has also been widely assumed, and I'm also in this camp as well, that Glamrock Freddy is either possessed or connected to the spirit of Michael Afton in some way. So from a storyline perspective, that also makes sense because you also have in FNAF 4 where the older brother Michael Afton is bullying the FNAF 4 crying child relentlessly, scaring him with the Foxy mask and making his life miserable. And eventually, it climaxing to a point where you're shoving your younger brother in the mouth of Fredbear and killing him on his birthday. And now you have Michael Afton in the Glamrock Freddy suit, using his stomach catch to instead protect the Gregory, the FNAF 4 crying child, possibly. So you go from bullying him to eventually leading to his death, and now you're protecting him because you're trying to make amends and try to make up for your mistakes, make up for your wrongdoing.
And more often,
so it's not just like the striped shirt, it's also like storylines as well are also connected, possibly.
than not, that robot theory gets boiled down to this singular graphic right here, so much so that we actually started to meme on it ourselves.
But now, with the introduction of David Murray, we've got to revisit his line of thinking. Because this time, we have a lot more than appearance. We also have shared personality, dynamics, and themes. There's way more substance to this connection. And just to clarify up front, no, I do not think Gregory or the Crying Child are literal robots. I think they're human, but we'll come back to that. The first thing...
Even though I will say, again, robots are a thing in this series.
I set out to do was find all the connections between David Murray and Gregory. Back to the first image I showed, this shot of Security Breach shows Gregory and Glamrock Freddy sitting on a hill under a tree. Now, this...
Presumably, that is the Lorekeeper ending in FNAF 6, where you're overlooking the gravestones of the original Missing Kids incident victims, where it's Gabriel, Jeremy, Fritz, Susie, Charlotte in the top corner, which is the puppet, and then Cassidy off to the side in the grass.
This is the same exact hill we see David and Fiona sitting on. We know that the grounds of Murray's Costume Manor will later be used as the grounds for the Pizzaplex. So it's interesting that these two are literally sitting in the same spot.
Are they used for the Pizzaplex? Hold on. Is the Costume Manor used for the Pizzaplex? Maybe I'm misinterpreting, misremembering, but I don't know about that. Like, I've heard Edwin's house being repurposed and reused to be the FNAF 4 house. But why would the Costume Manor be tied to the Pizzaplex? Because the Pizzaplex is tied to FNAF 6 and potentially also Sister Location, not the Costume Manor. And if you want to say, oh, well, it's connected because at the bottom of the Pizzaplex is where the Mimic is housed. Where the Mimic is housed, where you first see it in Ruin, is not the Costume Manor. It's underneath the FNAF 6 location. They are completely separate. You also have to remember that Secret of the Mimic takes place in the 70s, and then Security Breach Ruin era is like the 2020-2030s. So there's like a 50, 60 year timeline jump as well. That's why it's so confusing when, again, we don't know what canon ending of Secret of the Mimic, what the canon ending is, but if we go off the illusion that the canon ending is the one where the Mimic causes the car to crash and tumble over, and then it steals the schematic from our character and then walks off away, we don't know where it's walking. We don't know what the M2 is using the schematics for. We don't know how it ends up in underneath the pizza putts by the time we get to Ruin. We have no idea, and that's what we're trying to piece together to this very day. So, is it tied to Seek of the Mimic, location of the costume manor with security breach? I don't know about that. Hey, if I'm wrong, let me know. Let me call me out in the comments if I'm missing out on something, because I probably am.
Go up to that house. You see how one of those trees on the left is modeled differently than all the others with the swing set on it, swing set tire?
Yeah, that is interesting.
Go up to that tree. Go up to that tree. Turn around.
Oh, don't tell me
What
it's...
screenshot is that? Yep.
Ha! Okay.
This is the security breach hill. So, you know that image of...
I don't know about that. I don't know about that. The security breach hill. I don't know about that. Because, hold up. Let me...
David,
hold on, we're doing this in real time.
Turn around, security breach hill.
Okay. So, I'll be right back. Okay. Bear with me for a second. This is obviously a live stream, so we're all doing this in real time. But yeah, this looks familiar, doesn't it? And I pull up this image. Where is the image? God damn it, man. Hold on. Okay, so apologies on all the awkward cuts, but I do want to look and compare all of them. Big. Yeah, I guess that works. Okay, so these are all the hilltop pictures endings that we have seen so far in this series. In the bottom left corner is the FNAF sits, Lorekeeper ending hilltop that I was talking about, where you have the gravesite of presumably the victims from the missing children's incident, where it's Gabriel, Jeremy, Fritz, Susie, Charlotte in the back corner behind all of them. And then you have Cassidy, the gravesite that's in the grass, which is Golden Freddy, or at least one of the spirits that possesses Golden Freddy. Look at the Seek of the Mimic one, and then the hilltop ending in Security Breach. Are they all the same? The reason why I'm bringing them out all visually is because they don't look the same, right? Like, if we want to get granular, like maybe the grass looks different, but it's just one of those things where I don't know. I think I need more evidence. Not like now that I'm looking at all three images, I think I need to get more evidence than simply just saying, "Oh, characters on the grass looking over a hill," because you have these images and they don't really look the same. I don't know. All right, let's continue on.
So, you know that image of
'cause
David Murray
image
and the
is
mimic? Yes.
wrong.
We don't see the Pizzaplex here because the image is flipped. David and Fiona are looking at the factory, while Gregory and Freddy are looking away from it, looking forward. Then, obviously, he looks like David. He's rocking the same fit, with the same pose, and the same hair. Enough said. But the meat and potatoes is what we learn about Gregory. Most of his backstory comes from the Patient 46 therapy tapes. Keep in mind that these are the most important lore collectible in Security Breach. They're one of the last things you usually collect, and each has only a minute or two to deliver its information, so there isn't much time to waste. The connections to David Murray found in these present themselves in some very telling ways. I think you'll catch on to what I think is happening pretty soon. One of the first comments made to Gregory here is,
When the shade's pulled, it feels like we're in a cubbyhole or a cave.
now back then, this comment seemed like a really weird detail to emphasize in tapes that were clearly insanely lore relevant, but that's because we didn't know David's story yet. In Secret of the Mimic, David Murray has a little cubby area set up. Potential God David incoming. And the cave is one of the most important areas in Moon.exe, where the statue of the baby owl, representing David, resides. We know that Gregory, too, in the same room with the Balloon World arcade machine, more about that machine later, sets up a cubbyhole of his own. The Patient 46 tapes then take a mysterious turn when the therapist brings up a tragic history involving Gregory's parents.
Okay, so question on the cubbyhole stuff. It's presumably that Gregory, because we saw this in Ruin, it's presumed that Gregory doesn't have like a record of him in the Security Breach database because he's pretty much just been living there. He's not registered in the system, but he's been living there because we see if you just simply do the leave ending in Security Breach, he runs outside and hides in a box. Presumably he's homeless. So since he has nowhere to go, he pretty much lives in the Pizzaplex. So both having like spaces, cubby holes, I kind of like it. I'm into it.
Well, I'd like to start by talking about your parents. What happened to them? And you? It was tragic.
But it's later revealed that the story Gregory gives here is a complete lie. The therapist herself notes something odd about the way Gregory talks about it. She says it's as if he's pulling his memories out of a book, rather than actually recalling them as his own and processing them in a subjective, emotional way.
But when I looked through the notes, I didn't get a sense that you've processed that emotionally. When I read your account of what happened, it came across as, well, more of an objective rather than a subjective narrative. Oh, sorry. You don't know what that means, do you? What I mean is that the way you told the story is more like you were reading something from a book than you were talking about your own past.
Subject.
Okay, so my interpretation of that line is the Gregbot theory. And what I mean by that is if Gregory is a robot, it would make sense why he is speaking in a very objective tone, right? Because he's a robot. Robots are not able to display human emotions, right? They're just simply stating things as a matter of fact, right? Simply reading off like things from a book or things from a bio screen. Oh, this is my childhood. This happened, this happened, this happened, this happened, this happened. Being very robotic. So I think that gives way to the Gregbot theory.
Objective. Like he's simply pulling memories from a data set. This is
Arcanus read 10 seconds later.
exactly how an AI would be described to recall and relay information. And it's not helped by the fact that the therapist uses the metaphor of a book for this, much like how we soothe David from within the Mimic AI, using a storybook reminding him of his past memories. Also, yes, I am aware that memory suppression or detachment are real things. I'm not saying that people that have these coping mechanisms are robots. Next, the therapist presses further, stating that Gregory is creating fantasies.
So, if you could process those feelings, how do you think it would affect your fantasies?
Gregory, speaking to the therapist here, is inventing fantasies, inventing memories from his past that don't line up with the documented past of Gregory, the human boy. These are stories he's relaying that he likely believes, but which don't actually come from his life. He's able to recall these false memories with ease. The therapist doesn't think he's lying. He's coming up with these easily. That's why they're described as fantasies here, rather than as an attempt to mislead the therapist. It's almost like Gregory is remembering and telling the story of somebody else's life. One of the next tapes presents some different information that still helps us in theory crafting. Gregory's being asked a string of opinion-based questions. Simple stuff about sports or whether he likes going outside, but he doesn't answer.
How do you spend all the time you have? Nothing. Well, how do you feel about sports? You like sports? Yeah? No? Oh, I get it. You like to watch them, but not play them.
And I think this isn't because he's being difficult, but because there's nothing there. His lack of communication here, to me at least, reads like an empty husk at times, rather than a liar. At this time, for some reason, Gregory doesn't have developed preferences or opinions on some things. Something is wrong with him, and the therapists can tell. Next up, the therapist describes Gregory as somebody that doesn't have any friends, as a loner. A strange thing for her to think, because we know that he does have a friend in Cassie. So for whatever reason, at this time he's being antisocial or doesn't know how to make friends. Something that, as we see in the games, but mostly in the story, The Mimic, David couldn't do either. He pretty much never left the factory, never went to school, and never interacted with anybody outside of babysitters and his parents. So again, here
His parent, because his dad was busy off in his work and being a very neglectful father.
therapist is describing a character trait which doesn't line up with Gregory's past, but which does line up with David Murray's. Weird. The therapist then goes on a massive tangent about how Gregory has developed a program to ask himself questions, get answers, and repeat phrases back to him. So it's a program that answers questions and mimics phrases.
I saw in your file that you have developed software programs that talk to you and repeat phrases, right? The program asks you questions and prompts you for responses. It's kind of like your own self-therapy, isn't it? Another way of talking to yourself to work things out, right?
That was something we talked about, and honestly we pondered as we wrapped up on last week's video. The idea that potentially Gregory either made the Mimic program, made the Glitch Trap program, is tied to it in some way, which wouldn't make much sense. Because, you know, you have Seek of the Mimic, where the Mimic program is essentially created by Edwin. And we know Fazbear Entertainment steals Edwin's technology with the Mimic program and makes it their own, meaning they turn it into Glitch Trap and that kind of stuff.
later described by the therapist that this seems like self-therapy to her. The Thing is asking about Gregory from within himself and getting answers from within his own mind. It's really bizarre, and the way the therapist describes it confuses me to this day, but the important revelation is in this clip.
When I saw some of your recent encrypted conversation logs, that's what I thought I was looking at. It felt like I was watching someone go back and forth in their own head. But the text found something that's different than that. When I read what they found, at first, I thought I was looking at more examples of you just talking with yourself. Then I realized it was different. When I study this, it sounds like there is someone else responding to you. Who is it?
There's...
Okay. My idea, my interpretation is it's maybe human on robot Gregory, and then Glitchtrap. The influence of Glitchtrap, William Afton, whatever you think Glitchtrap is, whether it's the actual spirit consciousness of William Afton, it's William Afton himself in a new form because he always comes back, or it's just the Mimic program. But regardless, because the same thing can be said with Vanessa, another character who also has like her own human form, but is also having conversations with another person inside of her, aka Glitchtrap. Because, you know, we see in the emails with Vanessa in FNAF AR of how, you know, she is trying to communicate and she's trying to live her life, but then there's also the side of her that is being possessed by Glitchtrap and trying to get her to submit to his will fully. That's why when HR flagged her Google searches, she had stuff like, you know, stuff like the real Vanessa would type in Google searches where it's like, oh, the like migration pattern of butterflies, right? Or then she outright types in help, HELP, in Google, just on its own, just help. But then you have, you know, the Glitchtrap, William Afton influence, typing stuff like how to induce self-compliance, or, you know, how far can you sever open human limbs before, you know, a person like loses consciousness or something along those lines. But the self-compliance part is very important because it's Glitchtrap using Vanessa's body as a shell, as a husk, to try to get Vanessa to self-comply to William Afton Glitchtrap fully, because she's the Western follower. She's not fully into it yet. The same thing can be said with Gregory, who we believe is also tied to the Glitchtrap influence in some way. I hope any of that made sense, but that is my interpretation here in that, is talking to somebody else instead of talking to himself, because we know it happens with Vanessa. Why would it also not happen with Gregory, who we know is another character who is also tied to the Glitchtrap influence? If the Glitchtrap influence works for one character, and it's two people trying to compete for control, why would it not work for the other person?
Somebody else responding. The language used here is very interesting. In Vanessa's tapes, for example, it's clear from the get-go that she's talking to a separate person, being manipulated, and doing out-of-character things.
But a routine check of your online history has revealed that you've spent quite a bit of time with someone in an encrypted conversation. We have transcripts, and I've read them. But it's not clear what you're talking about in these conversations. I can't make sense of it. You must be getting something from these that I'm not getting, right?
With Gregory, however, the therapist confuses the conversation as being self-talk, almost as though the thing that Gregory is speaking to could easily be mistaken for him. By this point, I'd become quite confident in this. Gregory isn't just confused or lying to the therapist. He's being influenced by something. And if the Frights and Tales books were meant to give us any information at all as to where Scott was taking the plot, it's likely that he's sharing his brain with another mind. That's why we have all these false memories, and why the therapist confuses this as self-therapy, a self-dialogue from within his own head. So, who exactly is in Gregory's head? Well, the next Patient 46 tape seals the deal. During it,
You ready? Oh, I'm bracing myself on the couch for this. I'm intrigued. All right, let's go. Brace yourselves.
an ink blot test, Gregory sees a mask, and the therapist launches into a paragraph about how masks are useful for disguises. She asks Gregory directly.
You think it's a mask? It reminds you of a mask? Like a disguise? Yeah, I can see that. You like the idea of being disguised? Disguises let you be sort of invisible, don't they? You can get away with almost anything when you're invisible, can't you? Yeah, you like that idea, huh?
She notes that masks allow you to hide, to get away with things you otherwise couldn't pull off. And then it clicked. In Moon.exe, you literally use a mask to sneak out the window without getting caught, to get away with running from our father, Moon, when we otherwise couldn't have. And in Secret of the Mimic, David, mixed with the Mimic AI, is constantly hopping into different disguises, wearing different masks. This isn't
I'm not trying to be the but actually guy, but again, I would say the interpretation also works for. I'm not saying that it's Vanny, because obviously the tape was, talking about patient 46. It's not talking about Vanessa there, talking about the mask making you invisible. So I'm not saying they're talking to Vanessa specifically, but the idea of Vanny, the character, also works in that context. It's a literal costume. It's a literal mask. And we know whether it's a, sound illusion disc or something along those lines, is when you put the mask on, you are quite literally invisible to the cameras and invisible to the animatronics, right? That's why Freddy and the other animatronics cannot see Vanny throughout the game in Security Breach, and that's why also in the Ruin DLC, when Cassie has the Vanny mask, when you put the Vanny mask on, you are in the AR glitch trap network. And when you are in that mode in the glitch trap network, you're not only able to see things that are otherwise invisible to the naked eye, one, but two, the animatronics also, like the Mimic Endos, are not able to see you. You are literally invisible. So that could also work as an interpretation.
just symbolic. I believe that the branch of the Mimic AI that is mixed with David Murray, M2, has made its way into Gregory's mind. The tapes round out with another twist. The therapist says that patient 46 has been seen with a glitchy, rabbit-looking figure, which sounds like Vanny at first, but listen to how the therapist describes it.
They say you were in communication with someone. Or maybe something. I have this still shot the text pulled from the security footage that recorded you in the Pizzaplex. That's you, isn't it? I know this image is distorted, but I think it looks like you. And you're not alone here. You're talking to someone. Or something. It's hard to tell. What are those things? They almost look like rabbit.
Hold up. It just clicked with me. Are we talking about the green glitching glitch trap plushie that you get at the end of Help 1 and 1? That's why I said something. That, I don't know why that didn't click with me at first. Is that what we're interpreting? Is it's the glitching plush trap?
Ears.
That wording is strange if it's meant to just be a person, but it would line up with what we now know to be Mexis,
Oh. Oh, okay. I guess that is also another something glitching bunny looking entity. Okay, I guess that's also an interpretation. Go fucking figure. In a series that's all about a recurring rabbits, there's a lot of interpretations and designs of rabbits in this series.
If M2 has made its way into Gregory, say through a chip in his head, it would make sense for the AI version of David to be interacting with the cradle.
Hey everyone, T-Dread forgot to do it.
But see, the thing about M1 versus M2 in Seek of the Mimic, and by the time we get to Cicada Breach, especially the Ruin DLC, that's where it gets very confusing to me, and that's something that, I don't know. I may need your guys' help because I myself do not understand what happened. Because M1 and M2, from my interpretation, M1 is Fiona, and they want a robot child of their own, M2 David, to become a family again. And they want to become a family again, so much so, they're willing to kill everybody else, including Edwin themselves, if it means that they are able to have a robot child. M1 Fiona, that's all they want. But then we get to the Security Breach Ruin with the Mits machine. Because remember, Fiona, it later becomes the Mits machine. They are literally in the same shape. It's the same machine. But in Ruin, the Mits machine keeps the Mimic locked away underneath the Pizzaplex. That's why throughout the game, when you as Cassie are disabling all the security nodes, it's a Mitsis bunny creature trying to send animatronics to your location, trying to stop you from disabling all the security nodes, inevitably freeing the Mimic from underneath the Pizzaplex. So it goes from M1, M2, Fiona with the Mitz machine, wanting to have M2, trying to bring David back, trying to have a robot family, to then 50, 60 years later, where the Fiona Mitz machine is the one keeping the Mimic locked down there. So that is something that has always confused me to this day, and I cannot make sense of it all, and it's something that, to my knowledge, nobody else has brought up, so I may need your help or something like that, because it's something that I, myself, do not understand.
A recap segment to explain to you what the hell he's talking about when he brings up stuff like the Cradle and Mexus, so being the lazy piece of shit he is, he made me do the recap segment. I mean, we all know how good I am at those, so why not? Let's try it. To begin with, what is the Cradle, and what is its purpose? Secret of the Mimic introduced us to the origins of the Mexus machine from Ruin. In Ruin, the Mexus machine is an augmented reality computer meant to keep the Mimic locked in the basement under the Pizzaplex, and when Cassie disables it, it can roam free and attempt to escape in that DLC's ending. But we found out that Mexus, or at least the blue AR rabbit part of it, has its origins in something called the Cradle. In case you want the full breakdown of the game's lore to better understand what I'm talking about, go watch my video on the subject or just wait for T-Dreads' when it releases in like 6 months from now. Anyway, here's the log the F10N4 computer sends Edwin explaining what the Cradle does. Edwin, please talk to me. We need to stop it together. Here are the blueprints for a Cradle. It can help keep David safe and provide boundaries. It's a type of computer and it's bigger than anything you've done before. If you won't finish the program, consider building the Cradle. It will keep people safe. Now, if you're familiar with the lore of Secret of the Mimic, you'll know that this log isn't just about protecting David. Later on, it's about protecting the M2 Mimic, who's pretending to be David, through this Cradle. In fact, we see the origin of the Cradle, the F10N4 computer, in Secret of the Mimic's parachute ending. Wait a minute, are you still watching? Oh, right, this is T-Dread's audience. They need, like, visual stimulation. Anyway, the Cradle is transported to the Pizzaplex in the future and is used as the Mexus machine. It was made to protect and create boundaries for the Mimic.
Yo, unrelated, Subway Surfers, that game slapped in... When was that game popular? Like 2012? God.
So Fazbear uses his tech to trap the mimic in the basement, giving the cradle full access to the building. This is how Gregory starts talking to it, as one of the therapy tapes shows us. Okay, am I done? Can I go to sleep? Okay, cool. Alright, TD, next time you forget to do a recap segment, that's on you, buddy. Go subscribe to me or something.
The therapy tapes are ultimate lore collectible, remember? End with the revelation that the tragic backstory Patient 46 gave, the one about the tragic incident with their family, doesn't match up with the records of the real Gregory's documented past. Guess what exactly Gregory was lying about?
All that stuff about your parents? None of what you said in your file about your parents was true. You had great parents.
Again, I questioned that in last week's video. If it's presumed that Gregory lives in the Pizza Plets and he's homeless otherwise, doesn't sound like he has great parents. Doesn't sound like he has a great childhood because, again, I'm sorry, but, you know, I don't know about you. I'm not a parent. I don't think I'm mentally or physically or emotionally ready for that. But if I was a parent, I don't think I would consider that a great childhood where, hey, I'm going to have my child be locked in this mega mall Pizza Plets from 12 a.m. to 6 a.m. and parents are going to look for him. I'm not going to call the cops or anything. He's just locked in the Pizza Plets and nobody tries to find him or anything. That doesn't sound like a great childhood at all.
Gregory claims specifically that he had a bad relationship with his parents. That leaves us with one question. If these stories don't belong to Gregory, who do they belong to? Well, like everything so far, this fits with David Murray.
Does it? Again, I mean, I would say, if we're being honest, if we're calling space spade, are there any children who have good parents in this series? Because I don't think I need to elaborate further. Hot take, controversial opinion. All right, sit down with me for a second. William Afton is not a good dad. I know, crazy. That a man who not only neglects his wife, neglects his kids, and kills other kids is not a good dad. Believe it or not. But, William Afton's wife, we don't know anything about her. The most we know about her is she maybe possesses Ballora, or is in the likeness of Ballora in some way of Afton's wife. But we don't know if she exists. We don't know anything about her, so I'm not diving into whether I think she's a good mom or not, because we literally do not know anything about her. Edwin is not a good dad either, because again, he is very tied up in his work. He is a very neglectful dad. And it was his own misdeeds, his own ignorance that caused David to die, right? As far as Fiona being a good parent or not, again, we don't know anything about her. The most we know about Fiona, the human side, is that she goes to Fall Fest and then she dies in the fire. Because the rest of the time we see Fiona, it's in her, F10N4 Mitz's Machine M1 form. So as far as human form, Fiona, we don't really know much about her other than she goes to Fall Fest and dies in a fire. And you get to Henry. We don't know if Henry has a wife. No disrespect if you don't. Hey, it's 2026. You don't have to marry. It's fine. No disrespect. Live your life. But as far as Henry, a lot more positive. Doesn't kill kids, which sounds pretty easy. Sounds like a very low bar to clear, but Henry's a little bit of a better dad than William Afton Slimmy because he doesn't kill kids. Which is, again, a very low bar to clear, but hey, it's something in this series. But at the same time, though, is Henry a good dad? Like, I don't know, maybe. Because, again, leading up to Seek of the Mimic, I was in the camp of, is Henry and Edwin the same person? Because their backstories are quite literally the same. They are both fathers who are geniuses when it comes to machinery and other animatronic parts. They have a child die based on their own misdeeds and misfortune. Henry's case, it is his daughter Charlotte, who is locked outside the Pizza Plex, and then killed by William Afton. And then in Edwin's case, David is the one who dies. And it's because Edwin is so tied up in his work, and he's so busy, and he's such a neglectful dad that he basically just has this mimic robot babysitter watch over 4-year-old David, because having a robot babysitter is so much better and is not going to have any safety concerns or issues than an actual human person, right? But David tries to retrieve his ball out in the street and gets hit by a car and dies. Because again, Edwin was so much more of a higher priority for Edwin to have his work on the, Cleanovac and the, clothes hanger. So much more of a pressing need than watching your 4-year-old child. So good job on you, Edwin. And then, because both of their kids are dead, they're now both grieving fathers, and they build robot versions in the likeness of their now dead children. And since they're grieving and they made robots in the likeness of their dead children, they go on to beat the robot creation brutally, which infuses with anger and agony, and they become a villain. In Edwin's case, it was the M2 mimic program robot that we play against in Scooter Breach not Scooter Breach. Ruined DLC, yes, but really I meant to say Seeker the Mimic. Throughout the game, the robot with the homicidal tendencies, yeah, that was after Edwin beat it senselessly. And then in Henry's case, it is in the books, so it's not in game form, but in the books, it is Charlotte, the evil version of that, like we see in the FNAF 2 movie. So, getting back to the original point, does David have good parents? I don't think so. But then again, I don't think any child has good parents in this series.
Who had a bad relationship with his parents, always leaving him with babysitters or spending all their time on work. David Murray is tied to the cave. David Murray is tied first to cubbyholes. David Murray at this point would think like an AI pulling memories out of a book, objectively. David Murray would have been too young to form opinions on many things. David Murray was always in the manor and factory and had no real friends, was a loner. If David Murray was assimilating with Gregory and communicating to him as another consciousness from within his own mind, a plot element that Scott has used many times before, it would appear to the therapist as self-dialogue. David Murray is associated with climbing into disguises and wearing masks to get away with things he otherwise couldn't have, and David Murray is more likely than anyone else to be interacting with the Cradle. And on top of all that, they look the same. Someone or something is trying to make Gregory the next David. The nail in the coffin? Balloon World, as I mentioned earlier.
Balloon World, interesting. You know what? I will say, shout out to this theory, shout out to you for trying to find a way to come up with a logical sound explanation for what Balloon World is, because I feel like for all the secrets, all the like Easter eggs this game has, I feel like Balloon World gets the short end of the stick, and a lot of it, it's like, hey, this is a game that you're able to play with, and it glitches out from the sun and moon character, but that's pretty much where the conversation stops. There's nothing more to talk about with this game because there's nothing to talk about. Like, you have the Princess Quest arcade machines, you have Burn Trap, who's locked underneath the FNAF 6 location, you have Vanny being a disappointment, not being a character at all. And this just like exists and nobody talks about it.
A random arcade game thrown into Gregory's hideout in the daycare. Let's talk. See this? That's Sun. Sun, without a doubt, represents Fiona, David's mother, just as Moon represents Edwin, his father. I want you to listen to how Scott Cawthon describes the way he instructed Steelwool to leave lore.
And I had a specific story for this in mind. Okay, for Security Breach, I really did. I had a very specific story in mind, and it is very different than the one that got in the game. And I think a part of that is the way that I conveyed that to Steel Wool, because what I was trying to do was I was trying to tell Steel Wool to do specific things throughout the game, put specific items in specific places, have specific characters do certain things, meanwhile not telling them what the story plot was. Because in my head, I was thinking, okay, when people find this, they will connect this to this to this, and it will all be revealed.
Now then, going to Secret of the Mimic, we can all agree that Fiona is Mrs. Helpful, right? She is literally the voice of it. Well, I want you to listen to the very first thing Fiona says, paired with the very first thing that Sun does.
A death-defying dive!
A death-defying dive? Stretching it? No. Sun is also the head of arts and crafts in Help Wanted 2. Fiona was the artist and graphic designer for MCM. Sun asks Gregory,
"Don't you want a puppet show?"
And Fiona designed puppets for David. In the Endo Warehouse minigame, where you are literally programming memories into an endoskeleton to teach it how to be a convincing human child, one of those pairings is kicking a rubber ball and having a band-aid on your knee. And it's Sun that pops up and smiles when you're pairing the correct memories and teaching this AI how to act like a real kid. Just like how I smile when you hit like and subscribe, so this gets pushed to the algorithm and I make money. Now, like I said, I think Sun represents Fiona because of all that. I don't think she's literally in there, at least I hope not, but in Sun's room, we play Balloon World, where we enter a glitch to help us get further into the game, as Sun looms over us the whole time. When we enter the glitch, the demonic face of Eclipse appears. Now, if Sun is Fiona, then Eclipse is certainly meant to represent David. And when Gregory, hiding out in the home of Fiona, David's mother, completes this game, the face of Eclipse comes up to the screen, dwarfing you, and says good night. It's the consciousness of David Murray pushing Gregory into the background through a game, just like Glitchtrap did with Vanessa in Help Wanted. So there you go. Gregory is meant to be the next David, and that makes sense because of all those connections that relate to David, because of Sun representing Fiona, and because, well, we know the Mimic storyline is part of the Security Breach era because the Mimic is in the game. But notice how I said the next, and not the second. Well, that's because we still have one dark-haired boy with a white striped shirt and a band-aid on his knee and a tendency to carry his favorite plush everywhere. And I'd be letting game theory down if I didn't tell you how the crying child is also another David.
Ho! Okay.
Let's start.
The thing is, the FNAF 4... Okay, no, excuse me. I would say the FNAF 4 Crying Child and the whole David connection, I'm looking forward to this because you got to convince me a lot more in this side. Because as far as Gregory and David, there's connections and I can totally see it. Because again, we know that when Gregory exists, it's in the Security Breach Pizza Plex at a time when the Mimic is also down there. So that makes sense. Also, if we're talking about the Sun Moon stuff, and Fiona is Sun and Edwin is Moon. A couple more things about that. In Moon.exe, whenever you make a wrong move or you try to, I guess, like, for example, when you try to escape outside the bedroom without wearing the mask, Moon stop you saying, go back to bed. If we assume that Moon is Edwin, right? We know Edwin is a genius inventor, and he's the one that programmed the Mimic AI. So basically, it's Edwin trying to course correct David as the Mimic program, saying, oh, go to these areas, go to these locations, and every time you try to go off the beaten path is I stop you and I try to course correct you, right? Like an AI program. So that's one. And two, if I'm not mistaken, at the end of, I think another reason why Fiona is tied to Sun isn't there a Fall Fest statue or burned down statue or burned down? It's something burned down related to Fall Fest when you interact with Sun. And we know Fiona dies in the Fall Fest fire.
Start with the basics. In the new Game Plus ending of Secret of the Mimic, Fiona, David's robot mother, I can't believe I just said that, sends you up to the old manor to ask Edwin to fix their family. And with the glitch permission unlocked, you're able to do just that to her son, named Dave. Where do we do this? A bedroom. One with a familiar layout and familiar toys. One that will later become the basis for a room we all recognize. Thanks to the in-game emails and the timeline established in Curse of Dreadbear, we know this house that we're in, and that has this bedroom, is eventually repossessed by William Afton and rebuilt by 1983. This bedroom, it becomes the Crying Child's bedroom. Now, how do we fix David? Well, we guide him through positive, happy memories. Listen to the wording here.
Do you remember how our story begins?
We use this memory, placing ourselves in the roles of friends of the Freddy's characters, to remind this child named Dave, who lives in the FNAF 4 house, of a happy memory, and he is then made whole, signaled through an achievement with the description, "Fix what is broken." Language also used on Gregory. I think that starts right now. Right?
I feel you are broken.
Yep.
Don't worry about
And the Crying Child.
You're broken. We are still your friends.
Already we have way more than just a visual similarity. We have two children, both seemingly named David, connected to the same property, the same bedroom, the same toys, and the same Freddy's character-themed memories used to put them back together. And those are just connections from a surface-level glance at one ending of one game. So the question becomes, if this much connects on the surface, what happens when we go another layer deep? I did a live stream recently where some friends and I went through all their appearances and jotted down the similarities between Dave Murray and Dave Afton. Here's just a few of them.
Dark hair, striped shirt, carries his stuffy everywhere. Neglectful father who's always working. Named Dave. Little same house, little same toys. Both present as a mascot suit that teleports. Afraid of medical endos. Both have no real friends. Both have a close relationship to the core four. Both are scared of Fotsy. Die on their birthday and absent. No mother at home and a babysitter. Okay, so a couple things I want to touch on. It's never been confirmed that the FNAF 4 Crown Child is named Dave. That's just the theory that pretty much everyone in the community has like rallied around and accepted, but it's never been confirmed. So I will say that. Little same house, little same toys, yes. Both presented as a mascot suit that teleports. So we know David Murray is tied to the Tiger Rock plushie, which does teleport. And we believe that the FNAF 4 Crown Child goes on to be at least one of the spirits of Golden Freddy, who is another suit that teleports. But this right here, afraid of metal endos. Are they? Like, is either character afraid of metal endos? Because, bear with me. And again, if I'm wrong, say, oh my god, you're so dumb. Of course they're scared. Let me know if I've been wrong this entire time. And yeah, they are. And they've always been afraid of the metal endos. But hear me out. The FNAF 4 Crown Child, we don't know what they are afraid of. We know they're afraid of something, and they saw something, right? Whenever they are in the pizzeria, they are scared and miserable. But we don't know why. All we know is dialogue from second friend Fredbear saying, you know, remember what you saw. You know what will happen if he catches you. And that is it. But as far as like what they are afraid of, who knows, right? Like, is it they're afraid of the metal endos? Is it that they're afraid of, you know, what happens when you get too close? Because if we're talking about the death order, an interpretation that, you know, I kind of agree with is that Elizabeth Afton dies prior to the FNAF 4 Crown Child. That's why the bedroom is empty. And that would also carry weight for why the FNAF 4 Crown Child would be scared, because we know Elizabeth Afton's death, in her case, she gets too close to one of the animatronics, their stomach hatch opens, a claw comes out a baby, grabs Elizabeth Afton and pulls them inside and kills them. So, for Crown Child, that not only do you see the stomach mouth on Fredbear, but that also explains something what they're scared of. Is they know what happens when you get too close to one of the animatronics. Like, maybe that's the interpretation, that's why they're scared. But who knows what the FNAF 4 Crown Child is scared of. We just know they saw something. Who knows what. But as far as David's case, afraid of the metal endos, maybe? Maybe they're afraid of the metal endos. Like, I honestly don't remember. Hey, if it's called on the book, great. But I honestly don't remember if that's what they're afraid of. Because in the book, at least, the metal endoskeleton becomes David's like one actual friend. And they do everything together. So that doesn't really sound like they are afraid of the metal endos. So, I don't know about that one. Both are no real friends. Yep. Both are relationship with the core 4. Yeah. Both are scared of Foxy. FNAF for Crying Child, yes. David. Is David scared of Foxy? Maybe. We know there's a Foxy reference in Suka the Mimic. Scared of Foxy, I don't remember. Maybe. Huh. Die on their birthday in accident. Yeah. And no mother at home and a babysitter. Also, yeah. So I would say the Dave name, and afraid of the male endoskeleton, scared of Foxy. Those are the 3 where I'm putting a pin in being like, I don't know about that one. I think I need a little bit more evidence.
Both have dark hair, a striped shirt. Both carry a stuffed animal everywhere. That's seen with Tiger Rock, and then with psychic friend Fredbear, who he holds in his arms in this drawing. They have the literal same house. They have the literal same toys. They both have a neglectful father who's always working. They're both named Dave. They both end up being presented as mascot suits that teleport and cause hallucinations. First, David Murray with Tiger Rock, who downstairs teleports, causes hallucinations, and then Dave Afton, who, as Golden Freddy, teleports and causes hallucinations. They're both afraid of metal endoskeletons. We know that because David Murray says this.
Why does it look like that?
Look like what?
It's scary.
And the crying child is scared to death when he's in the back room. They both have no real friend.
But again, I feel like that's a very loose connection at best. Is, first of all, any child being locked in a supply closet would be scared. That's one. But 2, again, the entire time at the Pizza Platz, he's scared, he's miserable. But again, we don't know why. So attributing to him being scared because he's locked in a supply closet, I guess. But he's also scared, when he's walking around the pizzeria. He's also scared when he's walking home.
And are loners, since we know David never really leaves the factory, and David Afton only has plushies for friends. Speaking of which, both have a close relationship to the FNAF characters. Both are scared of Foxy's pirate crew. First, we see the crying child scared out of his mind when he gets jump scared by the Foxy brother, and Fiona makes a Roxanne doll, right, part of Foxy's crew, which scares the hell out of David. They both die on their birthday.
Is he scared of it, or is it just Edwin just, again, being a very bad parent, where he's taking this, puppet, and he's throwing it in David's face, and he's basically shouting at him, which caused him to, cry and be scared. So it's is David scared of the Foxy character, or is he just crying because Edwin is being a bad parent again, and he's basically just shouting at him with the plushie? So, again, I'm not trying to sound like the but actually guy, but I mean...
In an accident, they both have no mother at home and are left with a babysitter. On top of all those, which are objective similarities, there's something else worth noting. Around the release of Ruin, the first time we see the Mimic in the games, Steelwool started posting a series of Guess the Sketch images, but one stood out. A sketch of the crying child from Five Nights at Freddy's 4. The crying child, who we know has a ton of narrative significance, but who hasn't really been actively referenced in years. This tells us something important. Steelwool was thinking about the crying child at the exact time they were actively writing the Mimic story. So now, I had the motivation.
I'll say partially the reason why FNAF 4 Crying Child is not referenced or talked about, because as a whole, we don't talk about FNAF 4 because it is so complicated, it's so confusing to talk about, where it's you know what? We just give up. We might as well not even talk about FNAF 4 because there's no reason to try and make sense of it, because who knows what that game's about. So it's like, you know what? It's better just to leave it off to the side and just pretend it didn't exist.
To go back and re-examine.
Instead, we will talk about the security breach storyline for the 50th time.
In every appearance of the crying child, and the connections between him and David Murray just became harder and harder to ignore. What I found are more objective, clearly repeated motifs between David Murray and the crying child. So let's keep walking through them one by one. The crying child's first appearance is in FNAF 4, and instantly the game opens with a detail that until now seemed absolutely irrelevant. The crying child is trapped in his bedroom. The door is locked from the other side. In other words, barred from the other side. That same phrase, barred from the other side, is used to describe how the player of Moon.exe, who represents David in one way or another, is locked in their bedroom. Alright, next.
Okay, well, I'm not going to say it. I'm not going to say it again because you already know what I'm going to say. But this is also not the only 2 times we see a character locked inside a house. Because let me bring up another house in this series that is canonically either at the very minimum a interpretation to the literal example of the FNAF 4 house. Midnight Motorist. We know in Midnight Motorist, we get to a house who is off on its own, surrounded by trees in a clearing off on its own, and we know that somebody is locked inside the bedroom. Orange guy, goes up the door and says, come out and everything, and then you go outside, you wrap around to the back of the house, you see the window shattered out, and not only that, but the window glass is not in the inside, meaning something broke in. The window glass is on the outside, meaning somebody broke out. And then you see footsteps going off to a trail, and then Orange Guy, who we presumably William Afton, who says, ran off to that place again. He'll be sorry when he gets back. Who's the he? Ran off to that place again. Why is the door locked?
House in these FNAF 4 minigames seems clearly different from the one Afton later rebuilds on the hill, but still, there's weird similarities. There's a grandfather clock in the hallway, like the one we'll later see in Edwin's version of the house, and we'll see a flower poster on the wall with 5 petals in this room and in Moon.exe. For those who believe Midnight Motorist is about the Aftons, in that minigame, somebody runs away out the window, escaping their father. And in Moon.exe, we run out the window, escaping our father. Side note, let's talk about everyone's favorite character, Pigtail Girl. She tells the crying child that people's bodies get stuffed into suits at night. Something that never made sense to be a rumor in 1983 when FNAF 4 is set. Because, we all believe the MCI to happen in 1985. But now, with Secret of the Mimic, we have a new possibility. Murray's costume manor, the one David Murray's story revolves around, has 12 entire teams of workers go missing, later found stuffed into suits. That rumor Pigtail Girl repeats would make sense to be happening now in 1983 if that incident had happened in the 1970s. So now we have all this imagery and the timeline lining these 2 games up suspiciously well. Obviously, as I alluded to earlier, a huge similarity lies in the language used during both David Murray and the Crying Child's arcs. In FNAF 4, the Crying Child is told that he's broken, that he needs to be fixed.
Oh no. Oh no. Oh no. Oh no. We're coming back to the iconic lines of "I will put you back together," and are we really going to have the interpretation? This time, the speaker of these lines is not Michael Apton apologizing to his younger brother for shoving the mouth of Fredbear and killing him and coming to make amends. It's not William Afton making a promise to his dead son and build kids in robot form and harness Remnant. It's not Mrs. Afton, the wife. It's not any of those characters. It's now David. A new speaker of these lines. All right.
and that he'll eventually be put back together. These are phrases that confuse the fandom for years, but now compare that to Secret of the Mimic. Fiona uses identical language when talking about her son. She wants Edwin to fix their family.
It's not too late to fix our family.
The final ending is centered on helping David.
Well, I mean, if we go off the interpretation, again, she is a robot, and her whole programming is to be a mother, is to be a caregiver for a child. In that case, it would have been David. But after David died, it's now a problem because, again, her whole programming as, Fiona M1 is to be a caregiver for a child. But when that child is now dead, that kind of has an issue with their whole programming because there's nothing for them to care for. They need to follow up with their programming.
David recover his good memories and fixing what is broken. Even the way this putting back together starts is similar. In FNAF 4, the crying child hears these comforting phrases through his Fredbear doll, a Freddy's character who is presented as one of CC's friends. And in The Happiest Day, we're put into a different version of that terrible birthday party memory, where Freddy's characters, his friends, show up. Now, in the storybook ending of Secret of the Mimic, Fiona reads off a story involving the Freddy's gang, designed to help David Murray remember something important.
Freddy's again, except a few notable additions. And also a few absences.
Both kids get their feeling of comfort and rest in a memory told through the lens of being friends with the Freddy's characters, and both involve a calming voice guiding that child, using the same language. But why? Why is this a pattern? I've told this to so many of my FNAF tuber friends, all these connections, and many of them say that they're just parallels. They're just connections to be cool. And I
don't believe that. In this series, just to have parallels to be cool, and I mean this in the most respectful way, this series would be lame then. Is having connections just for the sake of it. It will be lame. It will be boring. Because you have to remember what series we're talking about here. This is a series where overthinking is all you have to do. Again, think about the early days in FNAF 1, FNAF 2, FNAF 3, FNAF 4. How we didn't know about, the missing children's incident. We didn't know the identity of the purple guy. We didn't know anything. How we got to a story was counting Freddy Buttons and Fozzie Toes. And hey, if you compare the FNAF 1 Freddy and then the Withered Freddy from FNAF 2, and you notice that there's now like 3 buttons on Withered Freddy in FNAF 2 compared to 2 buttons in FNAF 1. Does that mean it's a different character entirely? Is it a redesign? Like, that's the kind of overthinking that we as the community did way back in the day. So, we have been trained to count Freddy Buttons and Fozzie Toes since 2014. So, overthinking and overanalyzing everything, that's just what you've been conditioned to do this series over the last now 12 years. So, having parallels just to be cool when we, as a community, we look at everything, I don't believe that for a second.
I couldn't think of too great of a comeback to that, so I went outside.
I attempted. That's my attempt at a comeback.
And I walked up the hill, and I talked to the wise elder Unwithered Tree. Tell me, Unwithered Tree, tell me about parallels!
Good evening. I am the Storyteller Tree. No, not that one. Here to tell you all about what a parallel really is in storytelling. The word parallel is thrown around a lot in the FNAF community, but usually is applied very loosely or perhaps in a different way than would be common in narrative analysis. Usually in FNAF, people use the word parallel to just mean similar or the same, and while similarities are of course important to something being considered a parallel, that's not where the definition ends. Narrative parallels, whether it be through similarities of characters, plots, themes, or symbolic imagery, are used to inform the audience about how two elements of a story relate to one another, usually through contrast or comparison. Usually in FNAF we're only focusing on character parallels, so let's stick with that for now. By giving two characters similar roles in the story, or having them endure similar things, we can often learn something about both characters by viewing how each handles their role differently or indeed similarly. Having two young boys grow up their role...
No. Fun fact. So, I'm gonna give you a fun fact. In this scene in Star Wars Revenge of the Sith, they intentionally casted this kid. I'm not sure if you can see my mouse. Hopefully you do. But this kid who is in the front with the short blonde hair and looking at Anakin, they intentionally casted this kid to look like young Anakin from episode 1 because it's symbolically having Revenge of the Sith, evil Anakin, older, grown-up Anakin, kill the young version of himself.
differently or indeed similarly. Having two young boys grow up on a desert planet, be skilled pilots from a young age, and have destiny thrust upon them by literally the same mentor figure, isn't just a bunch of coincidental connections. They show us the similarities, but more importantly the differences, between Anakin and Luke Skywalker, where one falls to the dark side and the other resists it. As a more FNAF-related example, in the Fazbear Fright story Hide and Seek, we have two characters, a bully older brother and a victim younger brother, which at first glance may indeed parallel Michael and Dave Afton, but we need to analyze the text further to understand whether or not this is an intended comparison by the writer or simply two unrelated characters falling into common archetypal roles. This is why most FNAF parallels discussions ultimately end in a big shrug, as most of the time story elements are just rehashed without much true intention to compare or contrast. Sometimes the comparisons are justified, like how we can arguably learn a lot about Michael Afton from watching Vanessa Afton in the movie. But then we reach all of the connections from David Murray to Dave Afton, how blatantly the story is reminding us not only of the bite victim himself, but the game he was introduced in. Then we connect that to Gregory and how he is constantly being linked to the crying child, and we have to wonder, if this is intentional, what is Scott trying to tell us?
I mean, this simply just reminds me of the endless conversation that we've had for over a decade. Are the books canon? Are the games canon? Now, are the movies canon? Are they all in the same universe? Or are they all in the same continuity? What is it? Is it canonicity, continuity? What's the thing? And you've all heard my interpretation of how I've gone about it. Is they're all one canon, but they take place in separate continuities. There's game continuity, game universe, movie continuity, and then book continuity. They're not meant to share the exact same universe. It's a multiverse. But it's all under the Five Nights at Freddy's umbrella. Because you see stuff in the books doesn't automatically mean that it's tied to the games. It can sometimes, but it's not always a guarantee. Like, for instance, since talking about FNAF 4, one of the Fazbear Frights books talks about Plush Trap, and how it's a character that you control with your phone, and it's able to bite through anything, even like metal, like garage doors, all that. Have we seen that in the games? At very most, Plush Trap feels like just a little nod, a little wink. But as far as like any relevant story in the games, no. I mean, he barely was a character in Ultimate Custom Night, so who cares about him? And another example, since it's at least theorized as of the last week that the newest FNAF game is going to be a like pool, water park, something along those lines, because Steel Wool did a teaser image of like these like floating tubes that you would have like on a lazy river. And theorists in the community have taken like, oh, this color details is a lot like Glamrock Cheeker from Security Breach. And then one of these floating tubes looks like the, colors of, Glamrock Freddy, right? Well, in one of the books, it's, what is it called? It's, Felix, that's it. Felix the Shark. Because why not? But in the Felix the Shark book, the story goes that a character believes that there's always been a shark character in the Five Nights at Freddy's character roster. And everyone else is like telling him, like, no, you're crazy. There's never been a shark animatronic in this game. And so far, that is true. There has not been a shark animatronic in this series yet. But he is convinced that there is a shark animatronic. So he goes on this wild fetch quest to prove people wrong that there is indeed a shark animatronic in this series. And what he uses is he uses a book, because the book is written by a like FNAF theorist podcaster. She has written a book, and you could just simply read the book on its own, but there's a lot of subtle nods, there's a lot of subtle Easter eggs that reference like actual real world like clues and real world places. So you would just read the book like normal, like, okay, cool, that's cool, using real world locations. But astute viewers like this guy uses it as like a Trojan horse to start his ARG hunt to find this Felix the Shark character. He used the book as these clues, and then he eventually finds the water amusement park. He finds the destroyed, decommissioned Felix the Shark character at the bottom of the pool, and he turns it on, and then Felix the Shark kills him. And that's how the story ends. Does any of that make any sense? Probably not. But the reason why I'm bringing that up, and especially, as of recently, as the last week, people are talking about the next game being a pool theme. Does that then mean Felix the Shark is going to be a character in the games? Probably not. But it comes back to this point of, hey, just because this happened in the books does not automatically mean it's canon or it's guaranteed that it will happen in the games, right? But if there is a Felix the Shark character, I was on it. You heard it here first.
Because at this point, I don't think we can hand-wave away the idea that all of these are just coincidences or miscommunications. Some people are screaming parallels from the rooftops, but are these parallels? Well, in some ways, yes. David Murray is a neglected boy with a soft toy plush who has an inventor father, which is similar to Dave Afton. But if these similarities are purely narrative and in no way literal in-universe connections, what are we supposed to learn about the boys through these comparisons? Some may argue that by evoking the bite victim through David or Gregory, we are supposed to import our sympathies for Dave Afton into the modern story, but that doesn't really work for Gregory considering how his similarities are more visual than characteristic, and we're given plenty of reason in the text to feel bad for David Murray, so the link there is unnecessary, if that's the intention. Both Dave and David are seemingly being put back together by their parental figures, but again, that's a comparison, not a takeaway from comparison. Maybe we're still missing the pieces as to why this comparison is being drawn, but right now, considering the supposed parallels are direct in-universe translations from one child to another, I think there's more to be gained by looking at the in-universe implications rather than just saying it's a storytelling technique and running away. So, in future, before you call something a parallel, consider if it's actually informing you about the story or characters, or if it's just repetitious writing. I've been the Storyteller Tree. No, not that one. Now back to T-Dreads.
Thank you, Unwithered Tree. I'm now feeling better, because I understand that these connections probably mean something, and aren't just supposed to be le cool. Anyways, now I gotta go to the survival logbook, because there's actually even more stuff. The crying child actually gets some relevant dialogue of his own here. Through faded and altered text, we make out a conversation that gives us even more ties to David Murray, and later even to Gregory. Faded text asks Cece if his favorite toy was a plastic purple phone. This is a toy that we know were around for both David Murray and David Afton. When you put this phone into moon.exe and use the item, I kid you not, a crying child picks up on the other end with the quote, "He never sees me." The faded text asks, "Do you remember your name?" A character with David Murray's appearance struggling to remember their own name. Doesn't that sound familiar?
I'm Gregory.
He doesn't remember because he's been brainwashed to think that he's David for the last 5 months. God damn it! Because Gregory seems to have trouble recalling his own name at the start of Security Breach, where we know he's probably just broken out of some weird mind control nonsense. Perhaps he's been being convinced that his name was something else. Side note on the topic of puzzle design, if all this is true, and the thing that he was breaking out of was some version of the Mimic AI attached to David Murray, it would make sense why Vanessa is named in her therapy tapes, but Gregory is not. Because at this time, he would be going by David and telling the therapist he was David, and saying that out loud would ruin the mystery we're supposed to piece together later on.
Or the reason why we hear Vanessa on the tapes, but we don't hear Patient 46 talking, is because if we heard Gregory's voice on the tapes, we'd immediately connect to Patient 46, and that would ruin a lot of the mystery and the lore hunting. Because I remember at one point when the game first came out, we believed that Patient 46 was Vanny, because pretty much they were polar opposites. Like everything that Vanessa said that we heard about, Patient 46 was the exact opposite. Like one person, wanted to, have candy. Patient 46 did not. Vanessa likes the dark, and the other one doesn't like dark basements, or likes the sun but doesn't like dark basements. It's something along those lines. Like, they are clearly meant to be polar opposites. Before we got to, Patient 46 is Gregory.
Do you have dreams is the next question, with a drawing of Nightmare Fredbear. Guess what? The crying child responds to this, according to Hyperdroid, by saying, "I'm scared." And we know that the player of Moon.exe is scared to sleep ever again. Nightmare Fredbear, as Michael draws, is known to appear in a version of what later becomes of David Murray's room. Do any of these toys look familiar to you is the next question. And 2 of the toys listed are a phone on one page and a Jack-in-the-Box on the other. Was your favorite ride the carousel is the next question. We know that David Afton, from what we see in FNAF 4, never rode a carousel, and he couldn't have ridden the FNAF 2 one because that game takes place after the bite. However, there is a giant carousel in Murray's costume manor. If David Murray's memories were somehow intertwined with the crying child's, and how ridiculous would that be? It's not like we've seen another kid that looks like David have his memories in their head before. It would make sense that these sorts of overlaps are happening.
Also, we also know that there is a carousel at Fall Fest. Now, unless the Fall Fest where it happened and Fiona went to and died in the fire, if that was a, inaugural first year happening, that really wouldn't make much sense. But assuming Fall Fest was an annual yearly thing, it could also make sense that that's the carousel they're talking about. And one of the later years is the one that Fiona went to and it burned down. We don't know exactly when was the first year of Fall Fest, but I just want to throw that out there. That's another location that does canonically have a carousel.
Do you miss them? Is the next question. Underneath that question is an image of Foxy writing a note on a desk. Well, guess what? In moon.exe, sure enough, there's a note on a desk begging the moon to bring back the sun, implying that the writer of that note misses the sun. Admittedly, Foxy works better as a Michael stand-in, but we can still use it for David, because Steelwood decided to throw a random piece of graffiti in Ruin that literally says, "David, run Fox, run." The party was for you is the final statement. And we know that there were parties for both David and the crying child on the day of their deaths. What the hell is going on? Cece looks like David, has the same personality traits as David, has similar relationships to David, has a possession that functions exactly the same as David's, is soothed by the same kinds of things as David, has memories that seem to fit better with David, lives on the same property as David, owns things that David owned, probably shares a name with David. What is happening? I have had people tell me that all of this, all the last however many minutes you've been watching this video, all of those connections between Gregory, David, and Cece mean nothing. That Scott just set the game to end with a robot kid climbing out of a closet from FNAF 4 because it was cool. Scott knows about Gregbot.
I hear he solved a security breach.
Oh, he solves a lot of things.
I feel like he's solved security breach like 3 or 4 times at this point.
And I'm so proud of him.
Thank goodness someone did, because let me tell you, that was not me. The man who did not solve security breach, this guy, right?
If he wanted to steer the fandom away from that course because it was completely wrong, he certainly could have done so. If he wanted to steer us away from that line of thinking, he shouldn't have set the game to end in the crying child's room. Now, admittedly, Gregory...
But I guess we have to wait for the next game to come out, because we know what Scott does is, if his intentions aren't clear, he makes a point in the next game to course correct of what his original intentions were. That's why in FNAF 4, the biggest debate was, is this 1983? Was that the butt of 87? And then you get to the secret entered room in Sister Location in FNAF 5, and you type in 1983, 1983, and the television monitors go from grainy pixelated to the cameras becoming clear. Meaning, that was Scott giving the subtle nod of, yeah, 1983 was FNAF 4, not 1987. So I guess we have to wait for the next Steelwool game to find out what his intentions originally were, if we were really missing the mark.
Being another David is easier to swallow, because we know the Mimic story arc is directly tied to the things we see in the Security Breach era. But what about the crying child? How could David's consciousness possibly be in him? And why? Well, to answer that, let me bring you back to something that's quite contentious at the moment. The books.
Oh no.
John from FNAF, long before Secret of the Mimic ever released, made this connection.
The Silver Eyes trilogy were the first ever FNAF books to be released, and on a very basic level, the first book is about a group of friends who go and explore a mall that was built on top of an old Freddy's Pizzeria. While they explore the old pizzeria, they have a run-in with William Afton, aka Springtrap. That sounds just like what happens in Security Breach. We explore a mall that was built on top of an old Freddy's Pizzeria, and while exploring the pizzeria, we have a run-in with Springtrap. So if Security Breach is the first book, what's the second book about? In the second book, the twisted ones, a tornado hit the town and the mall is now destroyed. We learned that the mall was set to be demolished, but because of the tornado, the demolition was put on pause. As I kept rereading this book, the connections to what we saw in Ruin kept piling up.
And given the plot of Secret of the Mimic, John was way more on point than he knew. In the fourth closet, the game that Secret of the Mimic would parallel if John's pattern recognition was correct, Henry, a genius inventor, suffers the loss of his child. Henry is then astounded when he's able to recreate her into a robot. However, eventually he feels that this possession is not what it seems, and so he beats the robot, pouring his agony into it. This is exactly what happens with Edwin and David.
And that is why, prior to Secret of the Mimic coming out, I was fighting tooth and nail that Henry and Edwin were the same person. And it was just a thing of the games and books simply renaming the character just to be different, but the stories were the exact same. But now that Secret of the Mimic has come out, Edwin has outright stated Henry is just outright calling him Hen, meaning they are different people. And I have to yield, okay, they're different people. Even though storylines are literally the exact same, and that's frustrating.
So we know that Scott is stealing this story structure from the fourth closet. Well, there's a very important part of that story structure. William Afton. William Afton is jealous that this genius inventor could create this spark of life. And so, Afton makes it his sole effort to find these rebuilt versions of Charlie and study them, to learn what's going on. Afton specifically states that his desire is to recreate that accident, and I believe that in a way, that's exactly what's happening in the game. Afton will find out that a genius inventor attempted to rebirth his child inside a machine. He'll be fascinated by the spark of life. So he moves into Edwin's house to study and learn how to recreate this incident. William Afton is studying and trying to recreate David Murray. This is why he's so similar to the crying child. It's by design. The only question left for me is in what way he's doing so. I see one of two ideas for this story arc going forward. The first idea is that Afton simply finds out about what happens to David after moving in, and is fascinated by what his possession was capable of, such as the Tiger Rock apparitions. Because of this, he wants to cause another child to produce the same abilities so he can further his studies. Under this interpretation, David Afton is not literally meant to have the consciousness of David Murray. It's just William forcing his son to live as similarly to David Murray as possible. This is why we have all those personality, life situation, and physical characteristics in common. My problem with this interpretation is that David Murray in the games, unlike Charlie in the novels, was not a perfect possession. It was incredibly flawed to the point where that by the time of Secret of the Mimic, M2 is barely recognizable as David. What I think is more likely here is that Afton, and likely Fiona, are trying to rebirth the actual David Murray's consciousness and give it a new vessel in the crying child. In this interpretation, rather than Afton going out of his way to recreate a possession that was unsuccessful, he's instead fixing and completing the broken possession. To me,
you're broken, I'll put you back together.
This also fits better because we now know that one of the earliest motivations in this entire timeline is Fiona, desperate to recreate and fix her son. Fiona sends us to get Edwin. She needs a skilled technician to make use of these blueprints to fix her son. Edwin is gone, but lucky Fiona, because Afton, someone who clearly has the capability to build incredible things, is moving right into her house. And we also know that Afton knows about M2 already. They'll want to find each other. Now, I'm sure the thing that you're all hung up on is the consciousness swapping idea. Why do I think that's what's going on here? Well, we already know the Mimic plotline is tied to the help wanted security breach era. and Vanny literally gets mind swapped with a version of the Mimic that is pretty much explicitly told to us in the story. And because of this line from the trailer,
You will bring me what I want, and if you fail me, then you will, both of you, burn!
I think we're meant to assume that Gregory's got some mind swap action going on as well. Also, what we see in the books, and him being out of character in the tapes, and blah blah blah. Clearly, Gregory's not being himself. But I think people who have read the books and understand the plot structures and parallels do agree almost universally that Gregory has been being controlled and has broken out, and that's why he seems so confused. As for Cece though, and to further cement the point, evidence for this consciousness swapping idea is practically everywhere you look in this series. I have a series of live streams on this channel where I look over all of Scott's Fazbear Fright stories, the plot outlines of which we know he writes himself. These stories have a few motifs that are overwhelmingly prevalent throughout them. One of these is something like what I called the addiction structure. Another example of a recurring plot structure for Scott, and one that's more important to our discussion today, is the story structure, where a human loses their identity or is swapped with another thing. Lonely Freddy features a Freddy doll, asking a kid questions about himself to better take over his identity and swap bodies with him. Fazgoo is a creature that learns all it can about a kid to swap identities with him and become him. To be beautiful.
Hey, shout to you for trying to explain what Fazgoo is. God.
Features a monster stealing a girl's body to become her. In the week before, there's an ending where Phone Guy stares into the eyes of an animatronic, and they swap. In Into the Pit, Oswald's dad swaps with Spring Bonnie in a seamless way that nobody but Oswald can see. In Gumdrop Angel, the main character consumes a piece of the gummy candy, and eventually becomes an exact replica of it, suffering the same fate. The Monty Within is all about two consciousnesses, one of which is an AI, being able to share the same brain. And in Help Wanted, a game, the main character's consciousness is literally trapped and swapped by the malevolent entity who is the Mimic AI. Scott uses this structure time and time and time and time again. And many of the stories I just listed take place in the pre-Pizzaplex era. Before the Pizzaplex era, there was still AI swapping and pretending to be kids in Scott's weird mind plotting brain. Writing off the possibility of Scott using this story structure in the games is completely ridiculous, especially when now, unlike in the Gregbot days, we have an exact motive and several methods established for that to happen. For Gregory, it's 100% the chip from the Vanny Mask and Balloon World. For Vanessa, it's 100% what we see happens in Help Wanted. Now for the hard part. The crying child. How the hell do Afton, Fiona, or both get David Murray's consciousness, or M2 at least, to attach to the crying child? Please understand that I don't have a complete answer for this exact question, and it probably won't get elaborated on until the DLC for Secret of the Mimic, but here we go!
I'm ready for the hot take.
Does he still talk to you?
Now...
For Secret of the Mimic, but here we go! Does he...
This isn't still a top take. Does he still talk to you? Now, yes... It is technically different. This is not, you know, a yellow golden bear with a purple hat, and you can't really see it, but it should say a purple bow tie, aka second friend Fredbear. It's not the same, but the logic is still the same though, where it's a little plush Freddy with the faded text that says, "Does he still talk to you?" Meaning that's psychic friend Fredbear, right? A little plush Freddy, and the same page as he says, "Does he still talk to you?"
Still talk to you. What if the entity in this plush that we've long suspected is malevolent isn't Afton, who we see working in the back room, but rather has been Scott-conned into the version of the Mimic AI containing David Murray? That sounds ridiculous, but we do have a spring Bonnie plush that serves this exact purpose. A malevolent version of the Mimic AI resides in a plush of one of the two Fredbear's characters and tries to swap its mind with somebody it comes into contact with. And we know that Edwin developed a line of plushies with black, white dotted eyes that repeat phrases back to you, and that are described as your only friend. It would also mean that a Freddy doll is asking a child things about his identity to steal his consciousness, which would mean that MatPat's Lonely Freddy theory was right. Psychic Friend Fredbear is just the game's version of a Lonely Freddy. Now, admittedly, that's the biggest stretch I've made so far, and
because the reason why it's called a Lonely Freddy is because these, little plush Freddys, they seek out kids at Fazbear establishments parties who are off on the corner by themselves, because it's, believe it or not, it's so much easier to mind transfer somebody's consciousness and pose as them. It's so much easier to do that when someone is off on their own and nobody cares about them versus a group of people who's very popular and people are well aware of who they are and what's going on. It's so much easier to go after the quiet kid who nobody cares about.
I said, I feel locked in on an answer for Gregory, and I'm certain Cece has got to be involved, otherwise Scott wouldn't have thrown 20 references to him in the game, but I have no idea yet how exactly the crying child gets M2 attached to him. We'll have to wait for the future stuff. But to those who disagree so far, I offer a challenge. Let's say that unlike what many of my content creator buddies think, you don't simply think that all of these connections I've listed for the past 40 minutes are just to be cool, are just to be, oh hey, I remember the crying child. Cool that they're also named all the same. I'm so mad. Let's say you think these connections are intentional, and keep in mind the wise words of the unwithered tree. What do you think is a more likely direction for Scott to take here? If he is deliberately calling our attention to connect David and Cece and Gregory in that order, and making them so similar as he is, and having the motif within Secret of the Mimic with, oh my goodness, the same situation is repeating 200 times. What do you think could possibly be a more likely story direction for Scott Cawthon to take based on his writing history than what I've listed here? Just a challenge to open up discussion. So, in conclusion, David Murray dies and William Afton is either inspired to recreate his exact circumstances of possession, thus forcing his son to live as closely to David Murray as he knows how, trying to recreate that spark of life, or Afton and Fiona are literally trying to recreate David Murray and give him a new, put back together body in the form of the crying child, and later Gregory. And that is God, David. Also, by the way, this wasn't even all the connections we found. There's way more. The video would just be too long. Rye Toast finds that in the Curse of Dreadbear minigame where you're operating on Dreadbear, you're in research and development. The only other time we see R&D is in this game. What are we doing as part of that minigame? We're setting Dreadbear, who pretty much everyone agrees represents the crying child symbolically, we're setting his brain to a new frequency. And how about in FNAF World? A game that Scott has said is tied to canon events and is pretty much agreed upon by everyone to take place involving the crying child's mind. Well, funny that in the crying child's mind, in the carnival section, there's a giant metal owl with heterochromia, the exact thing that David is represented by in the story Tiger Rock. What a strange design to reuse for no reason. There's
also another connection of, as we're wrapping up here, another connection of the FNAF 4 Crying Child and FNAF World is Ultimate Custom Night, because we know that if you, I'm trying to remember exactly how it works. If you reset FNAF World and pretend like you've never opened it, never played it, and you boot up Ultimate Custom Night, and then you set Old Man Consequences to 1 out of 20, and you click on the fish, it causes the game to glitch out, and that's where you see like Old Man Consequences at the lake, and then you as Freddy go into the lake and drown yourself. You then boot up FNAF World, where again, you pretend that you've never played it, never opened it, nothing. You'll then see a little, like, the same Freddy, like 8-bit character that you were playing just in the lake, that you drew in the lake. You'll see that character as like an achievement in the bottom of the corner of FNAF World. And you're like, huh, that's interesting. And obviously we know, being even more explicit, Ultimate Custom Night is obviously tied to the importance of Golden Freddy. And we know that one of the spirits of Golden Freddy is the FNAF 4 Crime Child.
Way, way more than what I talked about in this video, but I couldn't find a way to make it all fit. So make sure you like and subscribe now, because I'm going to bed because this took like 40 hours to produce.
Fair enough. All right, but as we are wrapping up here, what do you think of the theory? Me personally, I guess think about all three. David tied to Gregory. Yeah, wholly on board with it. I think it does get a little bit of bias, a little bit of benefit that Gregory takes place in the Security Breach Pizza Pletz era, which is how we started this whole like mimic program AI era of FNAF. So Gregory does get the benefit there. So I'm on board with that. FNAF 4 Crime Child and David, that's a little bit of a harder pill to swallow. I'm still not fully convinced on that one. I think I may have to think about that a little bit more. But hey, again, at the end of the day, they're all just theories. You can agree with them, you can disagree with them, but don't attack people for theories, because at the end of the day, they're all just meant to be fun, thoughtful experiments, right? That's what they are at the end of the day. So don't attack people, make theories. But I don't know. Let me know your thoughts on what you think about. But yeah, I think I need to sit on it a little bit more. But I don't hate the interpretation, though. I just think there's just, like I was saying, throughout the video, I just think there's just some, coincidences that, I feel like it's like, is that really a connection? Like how I brought up how you have David Murray, and then we believe as a community the FNAF 4 Crime Child to be named David. Right? Or Dave, excuse me. Like, that's never been confirmed. That's just been a theory that we as a community have adopted and just have widely believed, but that's never been confirmed. And one of the biggest evidence points, because remember, we reacted to that theory maybe like a year and a half ago. It's hard to remember. I remember one of the biggest reasons why we believe that the name of the FNAF 4 Crime Child is Dave is because if we think about the other names of the Afton children, it's Michael and Elizabeth. And that's important because in the 1980s, since we all know that characters like William Afton and Elizabeth Afton, they have a little bit of a British accent. That was terrible. But they have a bit of a British accent. And we know in the 1980s that like Michael, Elizabeth, and Dave, they were some of the most popular boy and girl baby names in the United Kingdom in the 1980s. It was like Elizabeth was like one or two of like girl names in the 1980s, and Dave is like top 3 at worst. So you're like, that's a bit of a interesting coincidence. You not only have the names be popular, but you also have the detail of them speaking in British accents. That's interesting, Scott. But I think I need to just know a little bit more. But again, I'm not against theory. I just think, what is the, pure fun coincidence? Like, oh, that's cool. Versus just outright evidence where it's like, yeah, that's hard to refuse. Like, for instance, and Evan's points that's harder to refuse is, that bedroom being similar to FNAF 4. The house of Edwin's house later turned into the FNAF 4 house. Like, that is outright evidence that I'm on board, I support with. So hopefully that interpretation makes sense of what I was trying to say. I don't know if I made it clear, but that is my way of further explaining what I was trying to say. But I am a dumb.